my introduction to the counting of the Omer, the line that spoke directly to me was the new vows and the new promises we make at every step along the path, because part of what the spiritual practice of the counting of the Omer is going through a deep spiritual investigation. And if one goes beyond the mere formality of counting the day and reciting the Kabbalistic emanation to be mentioned on that day, it should be a journey of self-discovery. So we may have some absolute beginners in the room. So as I wrote in my email, this is going to be a long talk tonight. We'll divide it into sections. If I had a title to put up, it would be called Preface to the Counting of the Omer. Let me read to you the biblical verse at hand. It says in the book of Leviticus, chapter 23, verse 15, you shall count for yourselves from the morrow after the Sabbath. This is interpreted to mean the day after the festival, which means the second day of Passover. From the day that you brought the Omer of the wave. So Omer is an amount of barley that you wave as a grain offering. 7 complete weeks until you hit the 50th day, which is the holiday of Shavuot. The holiday of Shavuot simply means weeks. So you raise the barley, count 7 weeks, and then you have the holiday of Shavuot. All right, so the holiday of Shavuot, therefore, depended on when Passover was. Therefore, it was not fixed in the calendar. It was dependent on the second day of Passover. Already in the Talmud, they're asking, why do we count this? Because there is an assumption that this practice could not simply be an agricultural practice. All practices had to be at some level spiritualized, meaning having to do with the inner life. And it already says in the Talmud that the reason we count the Omer is that we are exiting from the 49 depths of impurity. And by going through this process of counting the Omer, we arrive at the holiday of Shavuot, the holiday of the receiving, the giving and receiving of the Torah in a state of purity. As far as I know, there's no rabbinic document that says what we actually do. I think there's an assumption that every person goes through their own spiritual purification to go from the impurity of slavery, becoming free, and then receiving our own appropriation, our own inner receiving of Torah. But the idea seems to be that we are not always in the proper spiritual state, mental state, emotional state to receive a revelation from the divine. It's something we have to prepare ourselves for. So if the reason we came out of Egypt was to go to Mount Sinai and receive Torah, then there's clearly the process we have to go to get through the holiday of Shavuot. We get out of Egypt on the 15th of Nisan, but we don't receive Torah until the 6th of Sivan, 49 days. So we recreate that journey in our spiritual lives. By the way, this goes very well with Mircea Eliade's understanding of religion. That one thing religion does is it sets out archetypal myths, the myths that found the religion, and that the adherents go through the myth, repeat the spiritual journey of the myth over and over again. So when we leave Egypt, it says every person is required to see him or herself as having come out of Egypt. We have to see ourselves as coming out of Egypt on the 15th of Nisan. We have to see ourselves as marching toward Mount Sinai, the 49 days. And we have to imagine ourselves standing at Mount Sinai and receiving the revelation after having gone through these 49 days. All right, so that is the textual background of the counting of the Omer. We see it in the Torah, and I've given you a little bit of the rabbinic. There's not very much history here. All it says is count the Omer in the Bible. We don't have any record of anybody doing it. The Talmud says do it, but it doesn't really tell us how to do any particular practice. So I'd like to teach about the Kabbalistic counting of the Omer, but I want to preface that a little bit. So that concludes the intro. And the next title you'll see is Preface to the Kabbalistic Counting of the Torah. So in order to do this, I want to remind you of the idea of God beyond God. Paul Tillish's idea that there is some divine that stands behind every religion, that religions don't contain God, religions don't name God, religions, as it were, point at the divine, religions are portals to the divine. Now, clear this is a point of view that mostly fits those in what I would call non-orthodox or non-fundamentalist traditions. Uh, so I'm going to call this liberal religion for lack of a better term. Liberal religion, as opposed to orthodox or fundamentalist religion, understands religion to exist in language and in myths and in symbols. And we are not to literalize the language, myths, and symbols. And therefore, if we were to pick one word that describes the liberal approach to religion, it would be poetry. Now, the poetry does refer to historical events, for example, the Exodus from Mount Sinai, but the meaning, I'm sorry, the Exodus from Egypt, but the meaning of the Exodus is not that it happened, whether it happened or not. The meaning of it is what it points to. Is there something deeper behind it? The great German theologian Rudolf Bultmann, 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 was the most prominent thinker in the 20th century to talk about this idea that religion guides us toward these core myths and metaphors that are necessary for consciousness, but the meaning of it is not exhausted in the literal meaning. There's something deeper behind it. Now, Bultmann, who more or less wrote very deeply about this idea of, of seeing religion as myth that we have to go beyond. He and Tillich lived at the same time, and I'm sure they were in conversation with each other. So I want us to try to imagine there is a God beyond God, and that this side of the God beyond God is our religion. And part of what our religion is doing is trying to create language and symbols to help mediate our relationship with the God beyond God through the God that is in language, meaning the God of our tradition. So one premise of this idea is that if one wants to truly experience the divine beyond the divine found in Scripture, the divine beyond the divine found in normal states of consciousness, it does require great effort and great discipline. And this is something I want to emphasize in this preface. Many people who don't find religion meaningful as a practitioner don't put the time and energy in to master the discipline. Now, it would be like watching sports and really admiring people in sports, but then you're invited to actually participate in the sport. You're given the basketball and put it out on the court, or you're invited to join the dance group or join the band. Well, if you say, but I don't know how to play, I don't know how to dance, say, well, you better learn because you're in the band, you're in the dance troupe. Now, very few people will say, okay, I will learn how to play the instrument to be in the orchestra. I'll learn how to dance to be in the dance troupe. But that's exactly what religion requires. If you are going to join the orchestra that is created by the congregation of people who populate the orchestra, if you're going to be in the dance troupe of the dancing Israelites, you have to learn how to play, you have to learn how to dance. So people walk, as it were, into the orchestra pit on the dance floor and say, well, it's meaningless to me, I don't know how to do it. And the answer is, well, did you learn? Did you study? Did you learn the steps? Did you learn the notes? So when things don't make sense to people, what they assume is that religion is something that requires no training, no inner preparation. It's supposed to be, excuse the term, it's supposed to be spoon-fed in a way that will make sense to a person who puts no effort in. I've seen this before. People come in, sit in the back row, and they say, feed me, spoon feed me. You have to make sure it's meaningful to me. And my metaphor is you've come into the jujitsu studio, you've come into the musical pit of the orchestra, you've come into the dance floor, you have to learn how to dance. We'll show you the notes, we'll show you the choreography, but you're the one that has to do it. So the counting of the Omer is one of those things that you actually have to master and appropriate internally. Okay? Now, a little bit about the Kabbalistic counting of the Omer. What happens is I hope you all were able to download and examine my own depiction of the Kabbalistic tree of life. It looks like a carbon atom, somebody told me, where there are 10 emanations going from top to bottom, and it's the seven emanations that are recited during this time. So the Bible mentions nothing about the Kabbalah. The Talmud mentions nothing about the Kabbalah. In the Zohar itself, all it says is the counting of the Omer is 49 days of purification. There's nothing in the Zohar about counting each of the days of the Omer, the 49 days, with the Kabbalistic permutations. We don't know who invented it. Somebody invented it. So here's a few important things. The actual names of the spiritual emanations, meaning different modes of consciousness of the divine, namely Chesed, Gevura, Tiferet Emet, Netzach, Hod, Yesod, Malchut, they were arrived at through a great historical development. The origins of the names of these seven emanations we find in Sefer Bahir, we find in other places, and there are different renderings. For example, in the rendering Chesed and then Gevura, in one counting as Chesed and Gedulah. The middle Sphira is sometimes called Tiferet, splendor, sometimes called Emet, truth. I've actually chosen to call that one Tiferet Emet, splendor and truth. Beauty and truth. I don't want to give up either one. So the labels are different in different systems, right? The meanings are different in different systems. It's important to remember that the label on the Sphira does not name the content of the Sphira. For example, Gevura, which means strength, in another Kabbalistic system is called Din, D-I-N, which in Hebrew can mean law, but can also mean judgment. So it's very important for me that when I am in the week of Gevura, which actually starts now, when I'm in the week of Gevura, I don't meditate on strength, although I might a little bit, the strength of setting good boundaries. I focus more on Din, which means good judgment, good rational judgment as a spiritual quality. So you all need to do your own study, but you'll find that the label does not match the depth of the meaning. And that's where you just have to go out and study. People say, how? I say, I did this before the internet, but today you go to enough websites, you'll see what people say, and you will find a system, this is very important, that means the most to you. As the poem said, it's your path, it's your journey. You have to find your star, you have to create your vow. So this is not something that I want you to focus on doing it the right way, but rather gaining the minimal tools to do it your way. Only you know your path of freedom from Egypt to Mount Sinai. It has to be your path, not somebody else's path. Now, I know people get hung up in, well, which day of the Omer is it? Is it the Chesed of Gevura? Is it the Tiferet of Emet? I wouldn't, I think for a beginner, it might be okay to get hung up on that. You want to do it right, but very quickly let go of doing it right, but rather master the tradition, master the vocabulary, and make sure to go on your own journey. So remember, the names of the Sefirot, of the seven Kabbalistic emanations, it took an historical period for that even to come together, and even how much the more so, the meanings of them. Sometimes I will share with another rabbi my meaning of a given sphira. He said, well, where'd you get that from? Some rabbi says it means this. I said, I came up with myself. They said, well, Rabbi so-and-so thinks it means this. I said, okay, he came up with it by himself. I came up with it by myself. He says, well, who are you to not think like Rabbi so-and-so? I said, I'm Reb Mordechai. He's Reb whatever he is. So don't get hung up on that there is an official, because there is no official deep meaning of the Sfirot. Now, there's a frame. There's a frame in which you study the Sfirot, certainly, so our discussions are mutually intelligible, but there's no canonical definition. If you come up with a meaning that is reasonably taken from the terms of the tradition, you can make a case for it, then that's a meaning that we throw into the mix of what I would call the meanings of the Sfirot. All right, that being said, let me just give you a basic rundown of the meanings of the seven sphirot. By the way, so how did this practice happen? In Kabbalah, in the 10 emanations of the Kabbalah, which are top three, the first one is sometimes called Ein Sof, infinity. Sometimes it is called Machshava, pure thought. Sometimes it is called Ratzon, pure will. Even the top, most recondite of the Sphirot has a few different names. In almost every tradition, the as it were infinite pure thought, pure will goes down to a sphira called Chokhmah, wisdom. It does not mean Chokhmah. We don't study wisdom by studying that sphira. Functionally, it just means a geometric point which has existence but does not have existence. Meaning, for something to have existence in geometry, it has to have extension. So I learned this in geometry in 10th grade. The first point is more of an idea that's a placeholder. It's only there so that a line can come forth. So Chokhmah is the generative point. You also think of that as in Chokhmah, the entire system is contained bikoach, in potential. So everything's going to flow out of Chokhmah. So Chokhmah is sometimes seen to be the seed out of which the system grows. So when you want to study wisdom, you don't go to the second sphira of the counting of the Omer. The first one is infinity. The second one is the point that exists and does not exist. And everything is contained in that point that exists and does not exist. Now, Chesed then extends over into the next sphira, which also has a few different names. The most common name today is Binah, which means discernment. But when you study, it has nothing to do with discernment. A better name is the quarry, meaning once the seed actually moves over to Binah, then you begin to have the ramification of the system. Ramify meaning branches. The system is branched out after Binah, but it is still a purely mystical idea. We're basically talking about the unfolding of the divine mind. The divine mind is unfolded from infinity to generative point to the beginning of the universe beginning to unfold itself. So you can see Binah as an unfolding. By the way, a very early term in Kabbalah for Binah is Teshuvah. Has nothing to do with penitence. It refers to a very, very deep idea in Kabbalah. I hope I can express it in just a few words. That as the divine extends the divine self into the sphirot, it hits Binah, and that is almost the point of no return. Because once this divine energy passes through Binah and becomes a ramified system with chadarim, chambers and chambers, when it moves out of two-dimensionality, you get a sense from reading the text that it doesn't want to go any further. That this energy of God knows it's going to be alienated from the infinite, and there's a sense that it wants to lashuv, to go back through Chokhmah into infinity. So Binah is also called Teshuvah, and this embeds a spiritual experience in the Sphirot. In the Sphirot, for the practitioner, there's a desire sometimes to go through the Teshuvah, which means the return to infinity. So infinity both unfolds, and there's also an urge, a drive to return, to go through that point of no return, which now becomes a point of return, and return to infinity. By the way, for those who are engaged in high mystical practices, it's very familiar. Sometimes you move toward the infinite, and everything in your soul says, I want to be here. I don't want to go back. I don't want to go back into that complex life of loss and grief and complexity. I just want to be one with the God. I'm ready to give up the body and go to God. Well, that's what happens in Teshuvah. You want to return to the source. There's something else that pulls you down into the ramified life, and there's something pulling you back to the source. So that's Ein Sof. I'll call it Ein Sof. chesed and gevura. So chesed is not wisdom. Bina is not discernment. They're simply terms, labels under which there's a very, very hidden mystical reality. So we typically don't study those three sefirot. They only really make sense to people on a high level mystical practice. The functional sefirot, which means sometimes they're called the murgash, sefirot that we experience in the emotions, are the lower seven. So I'll introduce those very quickly now. They are chesed, gevura, on the top of a triangle. The triangle goes down to tiferet emet. Tiferet I'll call beauty, emet truth. Those break into one called netzach, one called hod. Those go down to a second triangle with the yesod at the bottom of the triangle, and then yesod unfolds into malchut, which means divinity. So chesed, loving kindness; gevura, strength, reason, judgment; tiferet, beauty; emet, truth; breaks over into netzach, which means eternity, but has the sense of the will and the drive toward the upper sphero. It's oftentimes identified with Moshe, but here it means something like resilient drive toward love, justice, truth, and beauty. We go over to Hod, which means splendor. It's identified with Aaron and the temple and the Mishkan, which means something like divine architecture. So when you get to Hod, you think of beautiful music, beautiful architecture, a beautifully constructed poem. That's Hod. So you might say the drive of Netzach wants to be expressed in the beauty of Hod. And again, what Hod tries to do is capture the foregoing sefirot: love, justice, truth, and beauty, captured in the spiritual architecture of Hod. All of this then goes down into Yesod. Yesod is called the foundation. From a spiritual psychological perspective, I understand this as the foundation of the personality before it's birthed into the world. So try to imagine all these forces are working in you until they create what I might call your unique spiritual type, your unique spiritual personality. That's called Yesod, the foundation. And then Malchut is when it all comes out into history, comes into consciousness. Now, Malchut means divinity. It's also called Shekhinah, which means the presence of God that comes into history bearing all of these other sefirot. So that's a basic rundown of the sefirot. You can go look it up themselves, and you can see other people talking about them in much greater detail. Two more things to know before I get to the actual practice of the counting of the Omer. With all of this, there's what we call the basic Kabbalistic myth, the basic Kabbalistic tragedy, is that when the sefirot come into being, the lower sefirot, the lower seven, Chesed, Gevura, Tiferet, Emet, Netzach, Hod, Yesod, Malchut, they go through a tragedy, a divine breakage. Now, the Sephira of Gevura, which can mean strength, logic, judgment, reason, for reasons I can't go into right now, breaks off and creates a parallel false system. So there's a false system of sefirot. You might say opposite Chesed, Gevura, Tiferet, Emet, Netzach, Hod, Yesod. And this opposite system does not have Malchut. So the opposite system tries to go in and hijack the Malchut of the authentic system. So this one is called Olama de Shikara, the world of lies. So it tries to go in, hijack Malchut, take it over, and infect, as it were, Malchut with the world of the lies. This is called the Sitra Achra, the other side. From a spiritual psychological perspective, what happens with us, here you are living in the world, or let's think of other people. I think of today, these people with the intellectual lies of neo-Marxism and postmodernism, and the idea that the savage massacres on October 7th were acts of liberation, the way that language is completely inverted. This for me is Olama de Shikara. You want to understand what happened October 7th? It's the Sitra Achra. It's the other side that has taken over language, propelled people to do bestial and savage things because of an idea system. We saw this all through the period right after October 7th, and of course we still hear it today when we read in Israel. Why that Hamas is the the goal of Hamas is to destroy Israel, kill every Jew, and eventually wipe out Western civilization. They're not shy about it. They say it black on white. We see this going on in the States. Should a person devoted to the ideas of Hamas, who is a student in the United States, who's declared publicly in not mincing words, they are there to destroy the United States of America and destroy Western civilization. Is it to our benefit that such a person can stay in the United States? That's the question. Some political groups say yes, free speech. Some say no. We don't. The Constitution is not a death pact. Right? You'll figure out what your politics on that are, but there's no mistaking. It says it black on white. Hamas is dedicated to the destruction of the state of Israel, murder every Jew, and the destruction of Western civilization. They're not shy. They're not shy about it. The interesting thing for me is how many people in the United States join up in this kind of death cult. Well, that comes from Olama de Shikara. So when I study Olama de Shikara and how it infects the entire system, a lot of what's happening in the world makes sense. Now I'll go to you personally. It happens in you too. Love becomes the inverse of love. Reasoning becomes the inverse of reasoning. Truth becomes lies. Beauty becomes ugliness. The whole thing infects our system as well. So this is a very powerful idea in the spiritual psychology of Kabbalah, is that the Sitra Achra is able to come in and disrupt what you might say the authentic Kabbalistic system, take over Malchut, and as this holy authentic system tries to operate through us, the Olama de Shikara hijacks it, and I think it ends up in, you might say, the destruction of our authentic spiritual personalities. I mean, a lot of one ways that we diagnose spiritual sickness is they've been hijacked by the Sitra Achra. So let's assume this is true. It may not be true, but let's assume it's true, and let's assume at some point it's gotten a hold of you. Okay, so now we're going to go into the actual practice of it, and each week I'll add a little bit more. Let's assume that the Sitra Achra is operating inside of you in ways that you can't see. I'll give you a foundational example from my very early years as a rabbi. A grandmother comes to me, by the way, with her college-age children, who themselves might be grandparents by now, but she comes with a complaint that she sends a check every month to her grandson in college, and he never thanks her. And she says, "Don't you think that sounds ungrateful?" I said, "Certainly sounds ungrateful to me." And she wants just kind of verification that she has every right to be upset and she has an ungrateful grandchild. I said, "Okay, but let's go back to you. Did you write the check for the thank you, or did you write the check out of pure generosity, to the degree that generosity can be pure?" And she said the right answer, meaning not the true answer. She said, "Pure generosity." I said, "So can you imagine your son enjoying the money that you sent him without the expectation that you get a phone call or a note?" She said, "Well, don't you think he owes it to me?" The answer was no. She could not meditate on her grandson, enjoying her generosity without immediately a sense of entitlement, okay, coming in. So I talked to her about that, and then I went out on a limb, and I said, very gently, I'm not saying it to you, I'm saying now, it took a while to get there, "Is this how you operate? I mean, you're a person of some means. Do you operate in the world where I give and I expect? So therefore, giving is a way of extracting a behavior. Giving is a way of getting a phone call. So there is actually something of a contract going on. You do your side of the contract, they do their side of the contract. And I said, I want you to think about your children and other people. I said, I said, look, you came to your rabbi, so this is the time to go really deep inside and ask yourself, what is the motivation of my generosity? Now, I shared with her, this is something I heard from my spiritual teacher. There are 15 motivations for everything that we do, and 10 of them are unknown to us, but we can get a little bit closer to the truth. And as I talked to her, her very controlled facial expression. She was made up very well with the pearls and the hairdo and all that. I began to see a person come through the persona and say, uh, I sometimes just feel that people don't like me. I feel that the only way I get people to respond to me is to be generous to them, and if that doesn't work, I don't know what. And I could see pain, and I could see just the anguish where she's only seen as the grandma with the checkbook. And I said, I want you to try something. And she said, what? I said, tell your grandson you like to have 5 minutes on the phone. I already mastered the idea. When you talk to somebody, say, I just want 5 minutes, not more than 5 minutes. Put the timer on. Call the grandson and say, I really miss you. I miss the talks that we have, and I would love it if for just 5 minutes a month, I'd just like to hear about your day, what classes you're taking, what your friends are like. I just miss you terribly. Just say it to him. Be vulnerable. And she says, well, what if he says yes but doesn't do it? We call that saying yes but meaning no. I said, it's okay. I mean, it's sad, it's tragic, but a lot of kids, when they become, late adolescents, they're pretty much done with their parents. They're done with their grandparents, although many come back later. It might be part of the natural psychologically of individuation. But sometimes if you just make a plea, one person to another, I'd love a phone call, a few minutes. So they might accede. I said, but on your part, I said to this woman, you need to root yourself into the pure motivation of generosity. And if there are strings attached, separate it from the generosity and say, I'm writing the check because I'm generous. There is an expectation of reciprocation, but I'm going to be generous energy to somehow isolate those two movements. So when I think of chesed, right, for me, the week of chesed that is just ending is a deep meditation on the nature of love and generosity. The deep meditation on love and generosity, which for me ultimately is the desire to benefit another person without reciprocity. Now, we don't live that way, but as a thought experiment, it might be important to go to yourself and imagine this connection you have with another person and ask yourself, can I find a motivation that is pure chesed, loving kindness, love that will come through without a core motivation of reciprocity, although it might be in the background, but it shouldn't be twirled into the motivation for chesed. Now, there are many kinds of chesed. There are chesed between romantic couples, between husbands and wives. There's chesed, toward parents, toward children, toward friends. There's all kinds of chesed. But one thing, when you imagine chesed, you have to say a little meditation. I'm being of service to them. Now, another aspect of chesed is sometimes we do acts of chesed that the other person doesn't want, which means it's more about our feeling generous than actually meeting the need of another person. So this is a higher level of chesed. It's not what you want to give, it's what they want to receive that will make a difference. Now, many people, when we, go to other people, we bring a bottle of wine. We're not sure if they need wine, but it's a nice gesture. But think about it deeply. If you really want to give a gift to somebody, find out what exactly they want that would make them feel better, because our language of gift giving might not be their language of gift receiving. Even goes deeper than this, and this is mainly with parents and children. Many parents have children who exploit their parents, who depend on their parents for all kinds of behavior that are not healthy for them. And parents might unwittingly be funding an addiction or some other behavior, and they say, "Well, I can't just cut off the money." And I remember dealing with this year after year when I worked in the drug and alcohol rehab program, where the parent said, "I can't cut them off," and we say, "You're enabling them. You're funding their addiction." And a lot of our work was to help the parents with a distorted chesed. So chesed that actually leads to destructive behavior, that enables people or enables exploitation, or doesn't is not in a context of mutual respect and some degree of mutual affection. It's a chesed that's not operating in the world of interpersonal psychology. So the normal reading of the Omer would be, "I'm in the week of Chesed, Baruch atah Adonai, Chesed," and then you're done. You're not done. I mean, so what I do every week is I meditate on Chesed all week. As part of what I'm doing all week, I'm in my own mind, in my own way, I'm meditating on all the permutations of Chesed. So you will see in many counting of the Omer calendars, it's the 7 weeks with a permutation of that day. So day one, the Chesed of Chesed. Day two, the Gevura of Chesed. Day three, the Tiferet of Chesed, what it is. And that's okay. I'm not saying don't do it. I did it for many years. But after a while, Finley's opinion, you have to liberate yourself from that. I know the other Sfirot, and I don't have to do it in a formulaic way for me to make sure that I'm doing my investigation of Chesed in me. I'm trying to purify it, make sure that no shadow of the Sitra Achra is operating and down inside my experience of Chesed. So from a spiritual psychological point of view, it's not God's chesed to the world or God's chesed to the people of Israel, which is how it typically appears in Kabbalah, but rather the spiritual psychological experience of chesed, which is an as it were emanation from the divine coming through me, but in a broken form. So my goal during this period is to bring repair to the emanation of chesed as it is operating in me. This is called tikkun hakelim, the repair of the vessel. There are hidden sparks of chesed in me that I can release. And in a deep meditation on chesed, I can find things out about myself. I can understand my motivations and try to operate more from a chesed perspective. So from my perspective, it's a week-long, rather informal meditation that's always in the back of my mind. I have studied the other permutations, so I bring them in when I need, but I don't do the formulaic one because I did it for 15, 20 years, so I don't need to do it anymore because I have it memorized. So if you're at the beginning, you might want to do that. If you all want to live on the more liberated side of this, go ahead. So that's chesed. Now, starting tonight, we begin. Well, I think we began last night. The Sphira of Gvura. So I want to introduce that a bit as well, since it's going to be the next week, and each week from now on, I will start with the Sphira of that week, which means next Friday I will do Tiferet Emet. So Gevurah means strength. That's good. We should all be spiritually and morally strong people. We should be resilient. There's a lot to do there. But I like the other name of Gevurah, which is Din. Din is a word in Rabbinic Hebrew that means something like justice. So sometimes in the Talmud, you'll hear, for example, the world is shaped by three things: al ha-shalom, al ha-din, al ha-emet. So din means justice. So din means justice, but in a very philosophic sense. Justice as reasoning. Remember, ultimately, justice is having principles, and we reason other principles from that principle, which means once we believe in human freedom, then there are other things that flow from the concept of human freedom by reasoning. All law is basically reasoning. When we say, well, someone is guilty of a certain crime, we have to reason whether these facts fit the crime. All moral reasoning is reasoning. If I indeed love my children, I have to reason to what that means. Okay? So chesed by itself cannot operate with reasoning. Okay, chesed and reasoning have to go together. Otherwise, chesed might end up being, again, being engaged in extracting reciprocity. Sometimes chesed might be a way to control people. Sometimes chesed might be an act of enabling. I want to give you an example. When people say, I love you, what they mean is, now I love you, here's what you owe me. I've seen it many, many times. They say, Rabbi Finley, don't you think that a person who loves you should do this? I said, you're talking about you love them and what they owe you? Why don't you stay with what you owe them? Okay, so there is that the Sitra Achra sticking in, the unconscious placing obligations on your objects of love. It's actually not connected with the purest spiritual version of love, although it's human nature. All relationships have obligations, but Din can look at you and say, what reasonable obligations do people have who love us, and do they know about them? I call this the marriage of 14-year-olds. Not that 14-year-olds should get married, but marriages that have the spiritual maturity of 14-year-olds, which is they should know what I want. They should know what I'm thinking. Everybody knows that married people do this or that. And I actually think those have to be explicit conversations, because not everybody has the same platonic ideal of marriage when they get married. So this idea, I have an idea of marriage, and my partner is supposed to grok my idea of marriage and live by it, that's not rational. So Dean says there is a rational answer to the nature of a friendship, the nature of marriage. The more explicit, the better. Why do people get upset? Because their own image of what a marriage should be is not being fulfilled, although the partner has never agreed. The partner might not even know what it is. So Dean says, reason about things, even love, reason even about love. Now, because the second sphere also has to do with gevura, or boundary making, I have to share with you that much of the teaching that I do and the counseling that I do has to do with good boundary making, especially when I study the wall of virtue, the don't do the aggressive side, the 4 C's, but the defensive side, the constant explaining, justifying, explaining, entreating, denying, defending, is all a person begging for the angry person to calm down, as opposed to the ability, through an act of will and great skill, drawing kind, clear, firm, resolute boundaries. People don't know how to do it. It seems strange, but I've seen people try to set boundaries and they fumble for words. And the whole time they're setting the boundary, they're trying to get the approval of the hostile person, right? Now, setting a boundary says, more or less, I'm going to set a kind, clear, firm, resolute boundary. You may not like it, but it's my boundary, and it's to protect my mental, emotional, and spiritual health. So that's just what it is. The other person over there can get very upset. The boundary setter is going to say, you can get upset all you want, but I'm setting the boundary. Sometimes, actually, when I've discussed a person setting a boundary, I say, are they going to physically hurt you? No, they're not going to hit me, or they're just going to yell at me. I said, so you can take being yelled at. You're strong, but once you draw the boundary, be resolute about the boundary. So what I've given you here is my meditation on chesed. I'm understanding myself as an agent of love, beneficence, kindness to different people. And my wanting to know, is it coming through, at least ideationally, in a relatively pure way? I'm trying to be on the lookout for any untoward motivations. The motivations might be very natural, but I want to suspend them for a minute and try to get to what chesed really is. Then I might reintroduce the motivations, as long as I know they are there, and as long as I know they are not essential to chesed. I moved on to gevura because we're starting gevura this week, and I want you to think of gevura as being rational, as being rationally moral, not moral as empathy. Empathy begins moral thinking for many people. It's not the end of moral thinking. Okay. The morality as compassion needs rationality to make sure that our empathy actually takes a rational form. You know, people who are irrationally empathetic, in my mind, do a lot more damage than good. Right. And that's where that empathy, which is a chesed, uh, a part of chesed emanation, when not shaped by rationality, it sometimes has to do with self-congratulation. Look how much I am benefiting that poor person or those poor people over there or some victim group. It has to do with self-congratulation, not asking yourself whether some great good is done in the face of great complexity. So from my perspective, all chesed has to be run through rationality, through din. They're a pair, they belong together. Now, next week, I'm going to go into next Friday night onto so this is the top of a triangle, Chesed, Gevura, uh, Tiferet, Emet. This is referred to in shorthand, by the way, as Chagat, Chesed, Gevura, Tiferet, except that I look at the middle sphera and I call it Tiferet, Emet, beauty and truth. They're very connected, but they're two different ideas. And I think this is at the heart of spiritual psychology, being a person of truth, being a beautiful person, and somehow by my character, bringing beauty into the world, and especially in the interpersonal space, creating connections with other people that can be characterized as authentic, true, beautiful, the creating of beauty with other people in the interpersonal space. All right, so I've done three things tonight. I wanted to give you just a little bit of where this comes from. I wanted to give you a bit of the idea of God beyond God. We're doing all of this not just to perform the ritual, but in some way we're being of service to the God beyond God, the God who, as it were, emanates into us the drive to be loving and the drive to be reasonable and rational, etc. And so, how does the Jewish religion take this drive from the divine? We create this tradition called the counting of the Omer and all of its permutations. Ultimately, it serves to us to take our spiritual personality and our ethical personality, our character, run it through a purificatory system, and we don't know what's going to happen. This is something I can guarantee you. We're a new person every year. We've gone through things. You know, we've found love and we've lost love. We've had a great relationship and sometimes we've had difficult relationships. So you never know what you're going to discover when you engage this. But the idea is when you hit the holiday of Shavuot, you can say to yourself, something about myself has been revealed to me. Something about other people has been revealed to me. Something about the human condition has been revealed to me. We're headed toward the holiday of revelation.